Who needs the hassle of cooking by hand when you have a slow cooker? Throw everything in there in the morning, then forget about it until dinner time. There's nothing better, right? But as easy as slow cookers are, they do come with rules. Here are some of the mistakes everyone seems to make when they use slow cookers, so you can be sure not to make them yourself. Taking a peek. We get it. Whatever's cooking in the slow cooker has your whole house smelling delicious. Gather up your willpower though, you need to resist peeking inside. It took your slow cooker longer than you might think to work its way up to the target temperature, and lifting the lid for even a second lets out most of that hot air. Too much peeking means a reduced temp inside the slow cooker and more time needed for your dish to finish cooking. In fact, each time you lift that lid, you add 30 minutes to the time you need to cook your food. Using expensive cuts. Those fancy cuts of meat can certainly have their place at your dinner table, but there's no need to spring for the good stuff when you're shopping for a slow cooker meal. Since slow cookers cook low and slow, they make even the toughest meats tender and juicy. So grab a low-cost cut and let it cook all day. The resulting dish will be so fall-apart tender and full of flavor, no one will guess you bought the bargain beef. Not searing meat first. Be honest, if a recipe says to sear your meat before you drop it in the slow cooker, do you do that or do you skip it? It seems reasonable to skip it. It's going to cook all the way through in the slow cooker, right? Well, skipping the searing step does change the flavor of your dish, and not necessarily for the better. According to the cooking site Kitchen, searing your meat before slow cooking it caramelizes the outside of each piece of meat, adding texture and an extra layer of flavor. If you've never seared your meat before slow cooking it, you really don't know what you're missing. But after you've tried it once, you'll never skip that step again. Cooking skin-on chicken. Chicken cooked with the skin in an oven or pan usually ends up gorgeous and crispy. When you're cooking in a slow cooker, you're probably going to end up with a soft, rubbery outside that's anything but appetizing. If you want to be able to serve dinner straight from your slow cooker with no extra steps, use skinless chicken when you slow cook. Fortunately, there's a workaround. If you don't mind the extra step, transfer the cooked chicken from the slow cooker to a broiler pan and cook it under your oven's broiler for just a few minutes until the skin is deliciously golden brown and crispy.
Yes! Yes!
Fresh versus dry herbs. With all the props given to fresh herbs, it's kind of refreshing to know that dried herbs are actually the preferred go-to seasoning in slow cooker meals. Since they do their best when cooked over long periods of time, dried herbs are the easy winners when it comes to your favorite slow-cooked recipes. That's not to say you can't use fresh herbs in a slow cooker recipe, just don't add them at the beginning. There won't be anything left when it's time to serve. Instead, toss those in toward the end of the cooking time, so they're still fresh and full of flavor when you sit down to eat. Using the wrong size. Slow cookers come in different sizes, and one slow cooker does not fit every slow cooker recipe. The cooking time on each recipe counts on the fact that you're using the same size slow cooker as the recipe directs, meaning it's filled to the appropriate level. Your slow cooker should be filled halfway to 3/4 of the way full. If it's not full enough, your food will end up overcooked. If it's too full, it may not cook completely, or you may end up with an overflow and a big mess on your kitchen counter. Adding dairy too soon. Dairy products don't do well warm, and the slow cooker is no exception. If you add ingredients like milk, cheese, cream, sour cream, or cream cheese too early in the cooking process, you'll have a curdled, disgusting mess at the end. To save your dish without sacrificing the creamy flavor you love, cook it without any dairy and then add those ingredients in during the last half hour, cooking them just long enough for them to melt and blend properly into the dish. Using too much alcohol. It's usually okay to use a heavy hand when cooking with wine on the stovetop. As heavy a hand as you want, really.
And then for Aunt Sandy, a bottle of white wine.
That's not the case with a slow cooker though, because the lid stays on tight and nothing really evaporates. In fact, when you add wine to a slow cooker recipe, you'll taste more of the wine than you would in a stove-cooked dish. For that reason, it's best to skip the wine, or add it sparingly, unless you're really after that boozy tang. Cooking frozen food. As fabulous as it sounds, it's not a good idea to put frozen food, especially meat, in your slow cooker. If your slow cooker is full of frozen food, it'll take way too long to reach a safe temperature for consumption, meaning your food will spend longer than it should at temps that are less than safe. Don't eat that. Not layering correctly. Believe it or not, your slow cooker doesn't cook evenly all the way through. The foods at the bottom cook faster, so foods that need longer cooking times, like root vegetables, should go at the bottom of the slow cooker, followed by the meat, which cooks faster. Not greasing. Slow cookers may make cooking a breeze, but they can also make cleanup a pain. They usually end up soaking in your sink just as long as they spent cooking on your counter. And even then, you still need an awful lot of elbow grease to get them clean. Save yourself some time and use a cooking spray or a slow cooker liner to make cleanup that much easier.
Slow cookers can be total lifesavers for busy people, but you could definitely be using your slow cooker for more things than you are right now. There are tons of things that work really well in a slow cooker that you may never have considered before. Here are the things you should be using your slow cooker for that'll have you in food heaven. Party mixes. Believe it or not, party mixes are actually a great thing to make in your slow cooker. It heats everything at a low enough temperature so that you don't have to worry about burning, but still make sure that every single piece is coated with whatever delicious saucy seasonings you've added to the mix. Bonus, it frees up your oven, so if you're throwing a party, there's no need to stress about the timing of everything. Baked goods. Wait, what? Baked goods kind of have to be, well, baked, right? Actually, there are plenty of baked goods that work super well in the slow cooker. Things like puddings, crumbles, bread pudding, and the like all can be made in your slow cooker, along with some less obvious things like cakes and brownies. And if you really like that crusty outside on your baked goods, cooking them for a bit without the lid ensures that you're not left with a soggy mess at the end. Get ready to tote out your slow cooker every time you bake brownies. Oatmeal. If you're not already cooking oatmeal in your slow cooker, you will be soon. It's as easy as adding all the ingredients and turning it on. You can do a bare bones, simple recipe with just oats and water, or you can gloss it up a bit with fruit and spices like cinnamon and ginger. Even better, you can cook oatmeal overnight, meaning there will be a warm, comforting, delicious breakfast ready and waiting for you when you wake up in the morning. Stock. Stock is the perfect food to try making in the slow cooker rather than on the stove. To get a good, rich stock, you really need to let it go for quite a while. That's where the slow cooker comes in. You can add all your ingredients, then simmer it overnight to make sure that it's rich and flavorful.
Great soup, Mrs. Q.
Dessert sauces. Like stock, dessert sauces are pretty much the perfect thing to make in your slow cooker. These sauces are made for low temperature and gradual cooking. They're susceptible to burning or scalding if made on the stove when you don't have as much control over the temperature. In particular, slow cooker dulce de leche is as easy as it gets. All it requires is an unopened can of sweetened condensed milk and enough water to cover it. Cook that for 8 hours and it's ready. After you make the most delicious dessert sauces ever, drizzle them over desserts or pour a shot into your coffee.
It's like Christmas in a cup.
Bread. While any bread you make in a slow cooker likely won't be as impressive as the loaves that come out of your oven, this is still a great option if you want to bake bread while you're out of the house all day. The slow cooker operates more like a bread machine, so if you like machine-made bread, you'll be leaping for the loaves that come out of your slow cooker.
Oh my God, this is so good. I haven't had bread since I was like 9.
Are you serious?
How do you think I got these abs?
Cheesecake. Sure, making a cheesecake in a slow cooker will take longer than you're used to, but it's also easier and hassle-free. The texture of cheesecakes made in a slow cooker is also much smoother and silkier than a traditional cheesecake because it's steamed. Once it's done, all you'll need to add is fresh fruit, a sauce, or another garnish. Or make it even easier on yourself and eat as is. Now that's finger-licking good. Candy. Candy is super simple to make in a slow cooker, though it may not seem like it would be. Mix nuts or seeds and whatever kinds of chocolate you'd like into the slow cooker. Let it all blend and stir in any additional mix-ins. The options for mix-ins are endless, from pretzels to Oreos. Let your candy mixture set on a baking tray or in muffin liners and bam, you've made candy.
Bam!
Enchiladas or lasagna. Enchiladas and lasagna can both be difficult recipes to get on the table, especially on a busy weeknight.
You don't like my lasagna? No, it's good.
Making them in a slow cooker, however, makes these challenging dishes a snap to prepare any night of the week. Lasagna is great to make in the slow cooker because you don't even have to pre-boil the noodles. All you have to do is layer everything in your slow cooker, set it, and forget it.
I love it. The richness is divine.
Enchiladas also get simplified when made in the slow cooker. Yes, you'll have to mix together the components of your filling and fill and roll the tortillas, but all of the other ingredients are simply added to the slow cooker. Then, like the lasagna, you just have to turn it on and let it go. Mashed potatoes. Most people still make mashed potatoes the traditional way, on the stove. If a slow cooker comes into the mix, it's usually just to keep the mashed potatoes warm until they're ready to serve.
This is for Thanksgiving, this dish. This is for my mom.
This smells good. What is this again?
Mashed potatoes.
If you don't want to have to use both a pot and a slow cooker, however, you can just do the whole process in the slow cooker. Add potatoes, water, and butter to the bowl of your slow cooker and cook them. No draining here, just season and mash and they're done. Rice. Turn your slow cooker into a rice cooker by making rice pilaf in your slow cooker instead of on your stovetop. If it's a pilaf rather than just straight rice, you'll have to do some minimal sautéing on your stove before spooning it all into the slow cooker. Then add the rest of your ingredients and let it cook for a couple of hours until it's all done. Fluff it with a fork, garnish with some green onions, and serve.
Slow cookers are a real lifesaver when it comes to preparing dinner on busy weeknights. Is there anything better than walking into your house after a long day and being greeted with the enticing smell of a home-cooked meal? But contrary to popular belief, even the mighty slow cooker does have its limitations. Here's a look at some foods you should never prepare in a slow cooker. Fish, chicken, and bacon. According to culinary producer and chef Claire Langen, slow cookers are excellent at braising or cooking things like tough cuts of meat. Problems arise a lot when home cooks put quick-cooking proteins in the slow cooker. Fish and white meat poultry come to mind. Using lean proteins in a slow cooker misses the point. You are much better pan-searing or oven roasting and cooking until just done. That's because fish and boneless chicken are so lean they'll just become tough and dried out in a slow cooker. Unfortunately, so will bacon. If you want to add these to your slow-cooked meal, your best bet is to cook them separately and add them in right at the end. And those aren't the only ones. Cheese. Another ingredient you should only add to the slow cooker right at the end is cheese. According to food blogger Karen Phelps, cooking cheese for too long at a slow temperature breaks down the whey and causes the cheese to lump. So what you end up with is a big oily mess. Stirring the cheese in once the cooking process is done and leaving in for about 10 minutes to melt properly is the way to go. You know what that means, slow cooker stock photo lady. Good steak. If you're splurging on a great steak for your anniversary, don't use your slow cooker. The slow cooker is perfect for cheaper cuts of meat because it tenderizes the meat over hours and hours of cooking. A quality steak is already tender, so it doesn't need all that cooking time. Save the slow cooker for weeknight meals and keep your date night special by treating your steak and your partner right. Pasta. While pasta seems like one of the easiest dishes to prepare, it can actually be difficult to get it just right. The perfect pasta needs salted water and just the right amount of boiling time. But cooking pasta in a slow cooker gives you much less control and makes it very likely the pasta will be overcooked. And because pasta cooks so quickly and is so starchy, leaving it in the slow cooker all day will cause it to become a disgusting, congealed lump. Dinner, anyone? Long grain rice. The slow cooker is not the best option for cooking rice, as it's difficult to make sure it cooks evenly in there. Typically, the rice on the edges will become overcooked and taste hard and dry, while the rice in the center will be undercooked. According to Better Homes and Gardens, wild rice works better in the slow cooker because it's a sturdier grain and can adapt. Wine and alcohol. When you make a wine sauce on your stovetop, the alcohol will evaporate from the saucepan. But when you cook wine or any other alcohol in a slow cooker, that alcohol has no place to escape because it gets trapped inside. That may sound good, but in fact it will simply add an overpoweringly bitter alcohol taste to your food. Leave the wine where it was meant to be, in your glass. Dried beans. Kidney beans and other dried beans contain a natural toxin that cooks off in boiling water. But if your slow cooker never comes to a boil, you could be serving toxic beans! The University of Minnesota recommends soaking your beans in water for 12 hours, then boiling them for 10 minutes before adding them to the slow cooker. That should ensure that your famous chili stays famous for the right reasons, and not because it killed somebody.
As easy as slow cookers are to operate, they do come with rules. Not following them can ruin dinner and your relationship with what should be your favorite small kitchen appliance. We've rounded up the mistakes everyone seems to make when they use slow cookers, so you can avoid them the next time you dump and dash.
I'm just saying, it's a mess when they go in there, because it's called a dump. But everything you'd have made me tastes good.
Jack Bishop of America's Test Kitchen told Consumerist that using too much liquid is one of the biggest flubs people make when converting stovetop recipes to slow cooker recipes, advising, most slow cooker recipes are better with less liquid than you would use if you were making the same thing in a pot on the stove. So that could mean draining the canned tomatoes and discarding that juice, or it might mean using less broth than you normally would for a stew or a soup. These modifications are necessary since evaporation doesn't occur when you're using a slow cooker, and all that extra liquid will only result in less concentrated flavors. If you're making beef stew or pulled pork, you probably don't care if the condensation from the lid of the slow cooker drips back down into the crock. But if you're making a dish where even the slightest amount of additional moisture could ruin it, and you're not lining the lid of your slow cooker with a paper towel, you're making a big mistake. Sarah De Gregorio, author of Adventures in Slow Cooking, told BuzzFeed, "The paper towels soak up the extra steam and prevent it from dripping back onto the surface of the dish. I use this when making cheesecakes and custards or eggplant parmesan. It helps ensure the breadcrumb coating on top stays crunchy." In other words, if you have a dish where crunch factor is important or where texture could be thrown off by just a few extra teaspoons of water, the paper towel is an easy piece of insurance against a fail. Pasta in the slow cooker sounds like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it? It's easy to picture cooked for hours spaghetti that is so far past al dente it's unrecognizable. Bon Appetit doesn't mince words on the topic, saying, "Sure, there are slow cooker recipes for pasta dishes out there, but you definitely shouldn't attempt to make them." As much as we respect Bon Appetit's stance on all things food, sometimes slow cooker spaghetti and meatballs just needs to happen, and you're not destined for soggy spaghetti if you plan ahead. Here's the secret. Don't mix the dried pasta into the sauce until you're about 20 minutes away from mealtime. When your pasta is perfectly al dente, serve immediately. Or if you don't mind the extra pot, just cook the pasta separately and add it at the end. Either way, you've successfully avoided a mushy mess.
Now, what if you could prepare a wholesome sit-down family-style meal with just a push of a button?
Slow cookers are pretty basic machines. You can cook on high or low, there's no in between. So what's the best choice for scrumptious slow-cooked meals? As the saying goes, less is more. According to Jack Bishop of America's Test Kitchen, using the high setting on the slow cooker has the potential to ruin a dish. He told Consumerist, if you want a beef stew with nice big chunks of beef, a lot of times the high setting can boil the meat and it dries out and sort of falls apart. The difference between the two settings isn't a higher temperature, it's the time it takes for the slow cooker to reach the simmer point. On high, that's around 3 to 4 hours, and on low, it's 7 to 8. So imagine if your dinner is cooking away on high all day while you're at work. That meat will have been simmering for 4 hours longer than it needed to. Not the best way to ensure tenderness. You've got leftovers in the slow cooker. Clearly the easiest thing to do is to throw the crock into the fridge and reheat the whole shebang the next day, right? Wrong! Unless you're interested in rolling the dice on food poisoning. We get it, transferring the food to another dish means you just have one more thing to wash. But loading a still warm crock full of still warm food into the fridge means it probably won't cool fast enough, and that's where you wade into the danger zone for bacteria. Even if you've done the right thing and transferred the leftovers into shallow containers and cooled them properly, the slow cooker still isn't a safe bet for reheating. That's because any reheated foods need to reach a minimum of 165 degrees within 2 hours. And that's just not going to happen in a slow cooker. It's slow, remember? The USDA recommends reheating in an oven or microwave, and then using the slow cooker to keep the food warm. A little more work, sure, but it definitely beats the alternative.
I did not sleep for 1 second last night, and I cracked the bottom of the toilet bowl.
Whether you're a novice or a seasoned slow cooker chef, here are some general tips to help you get the most out of the experience. Grab your apron and your favorite slab of meat. Here are some genius ways to use your crockpot that you hadn't thought of before. While your slow cooker is cleverly designed to cook food unsupervised over a long period, you should still take some precautions to ensure absolutely safe conditions. If you love eating at home, it's probably a good idea that when you're done cooking, you still have a home to actually eat in. Clear plenty of counter space for your slow cooker. Since the outside of the appliance gets really hot when it's working away at cooking your dinner, be sure to leave a good amount of room on each side. Meanwhile, the bottom is made for sitting on top of any kitchen surface, so no need to worry about your crockpot's tushy. One of the benefits of cooking with a crockpot is being able to minimize the elbow grease involved in meal prep. As such, try to choose low-maintenance recipes that don't require a ton of preparation outside of placing the food into the slow cooker and letting it do its thing while you catch up on the day's news. Make sure to pick slow cooker recipes that don't ask too much of you. While you can find plenty of complicated ones, they kind of defeat part of the purpose of whipping out the slow cooker in the first place, right? Opt for recipes that cue for basic prep steps. One of the slow cooker's great functions is transforming large pieces of tough meat into dinner that's tender and juicy by cooking it slowly and consistently. As such, you can get away with buying slightly less pricey, fattier cuts of meat and still be rewarded with a meal that tastes incredible. The long and slow method of cooking the meat renders it fork tender without much effort. Great cuts of meat for your slow cooker? Try pork shoulder, lamb shank, beef brisket, or short ribs. The slow cooker asks so little of you and gives you so much. Don't begrudge it the nicely browned meat it so desires. While this magical appliance can do wonders, it still needs a little flavor assist. Please don't just throw raw meat into the machine. Searing the meat before you add it to the slow cooker is crucial for building a savory, caramelized crust. Your taste buds will thank you for the extra effort. The same advice you give yourself on New Year's Eve also applies when you use the crockpot. Go easy with the booze. When you prepare foods on the stovetop at higher heat while uncovered, most of the alcohol should evaporate by the time you finish cooking, leaving subtle undertones that deepen the flavors. But since the crockpot cooks foods at significantly lower heat while covered, the alcohol simply won't evaporate in the same way. As a result, your dish may be left with a strong, bitter taste. If you insist on using the hard stuff to add flavor to your dish, add it just after the meat browning step so the alcohol can burn off before you add it to your slow cooker. Sure, your slow cooker is probably big, but avoid the temptation of overfilling it. If you fill the vessel to the very top, the food inside will steam instead of simmer. Fill the slow cooker about 2/3 of the way up and you'll be all set for success. While we're on the subject of filling your pot, the bottom of the slow cooker is the hottest place. So layer the ingredients depending on which ones require more heat to cook. Try layering heartier ingredients like your proteins or root vegetables at the bottom and more finely chopped ones on top. Doing so ensures that everything finishes cooking at the same time. While it may be tempting to lift the lid of the slow cooker to peek, don't! Slow cookers function by keeping the heat closed in. Every time you lift the lid, you're letting all the heat out. Since it takes time for your slow cooker to get its heat level back up after this, you may experience some uneven cooking or it may take longer to finish than you thought. You'll get much better results if you can exercise patience and leave the slow cooker alone for the duration of the cooking.
Everyone loves a good food controversy, but the biggest throwdown might be the most unexpected one. What's the right way to cook dried beans? And where exactly does your slow cooker fit into this whole thing? At the center of the disagreement is the question of whether or not beans should be soaked before cooking. Russ Parsons, writing for the Los Angeles Times in his provocatively titled article, "Don't Soak Your Dried Beans," now even the cool kids agree, obviously takes a hard stance against the soak. On the other side of the argument is recipe developer Miriam Hahn, and she cites 2 reasons for soaking the beans, saying, "Soaking the beans helps them cook a little faster and also helps with digestion." Parsons thinks differently, arguing, while soaking shortens the unattended cooking time of beans somewhat, the time saved is marginal, and there are no other labor-saving benefits. What's a home cook to do with this apparently conflicting advice? Getting to an answer means digging a bit deeper into the science, and that starts with lectins. Lectins are proteins that bind to carbohydrates, and raw legumes and whole grains have very high levels of lectins. Sometimes our bodies have difficulty breaking down these proteins effectively, which can cause mild to severe gastrointestinal distress. While lectins may sound like something we should just avoid altogether, let us offer a more nuanced understanding of them. The common flour binder gluten is a lectin, and it's certainly a substance some people must carefully consume or avoid altogether. Phytohemagglutinin, or PHA, is the lectin that's present in high levels in raw beans, among other things. And while these 2 lectins can produce an inflammatory immune response, research suggests that lectins have health benefits as well, perhaps even cancer-fighting properties for people who can tolerate them. And foods naturally high in lectins often have lots of beneficial things in them, like vitamin B, healthy fats, fiber, and protein. The key for the lectin-rich foods that are good for us is safely processing them by cooking, sprouting, or fermenting the foods to reduce the lectin content to a level that's safe for consumption.
Planted some bean sprouts right there.
So, circling back to the debate, Our guts certainly need help breaking down lectins, and there are a few things that can do so effectively. It turns out that soaking beans and boiling them for at least 10 minutes, or cooking them on high heat longer without soaking, are both good ways to give our bellies a break. What absolutely doesn't work is cooking them at low heat like you would in a slow cooker, because it won't actually remove all the lectins. Slow cookers on the low setting generally only reach about 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just not hot enough to get the job done. And the difference in lectin content between raw kidney beans and properly cooked ones is huge. Raw kidney beans contain between 20,000 and 70,000 units of lectin, while safely cooked kidney beans contain between 200 and 400 lectin units. Boiling the beans eliminates the majority of the lectins, and slow cookers just don't get hot enough to make raw beans safe for consumption. Rather than using a slow cooker, you can certainly try a delicious stovetop recipe for spicy pinto beans. But if you have a reason, and there are lots of good ones, for wanting to prepare your meal in a slow cooker, you do have options that will make your meals safe to consume. So how can you safely use beans in a slow cooker? If you have lots of other kitchen tasks to accomplish, or you want to throw ingredients in your slow cooker in order to come home to a perfectly and safely cooked dinner, your meal can still contain beans, as long as you handle them properly. One option is to use canned beans, which have been cooked prior to canning. Another option is to cook the dried beans before adding them to your recipe, so you're certain they're safe. Slow cookers on the high setting typically get to about 300 degrees, which might cause you to assume it's safe to cook raw beans in your slow cooker if you use the high setting. Food Safety News, however, doesn't recommend this practice. Why? Studies of slow cooker casseroles demonstrated that the internal temperature didn't typically exceed 167 degrees, which doesn't achieve the 212 degrees the USDA recommends as safe for ensuring the lectins in raw beans are neutralized. In order to ensure your beans are safe for use in your slow cooker, it's best to either cook them ahead of time or buy canned.
Slow cookers are especially great for busy families, but as with practically any cooking device or method, there are a fair amount of myths about the right way to use a slow cooker. It can all get pretty confusing pretty fast, so let's discard the myths and get cooking. Many home cooks may mistakenly believe that cooking meals in a slow cooker, as opposed to doing the same in an oven, will result in less flavour. That's believed by folks for several reasons, from perceived difficulty of salting and seasoning such a big pot of food, to an inexperienced home cook throwing a whole mix of random raw ingredients into a pot all at once and expecting it to magically blend together after a long cook time. While all that is true to some degree, avoiding these common pitfalls is actually pretty easy. Making a meal in a slow cooker can still be full of flavour if you know how to adapt to the specific method that a slow cooker offers. The top of the list for cooking in a slow cooker is learning how to layer tastes so that every part of the food will have flavour when it's done cooking. That includes tips like softening onions and garlic before throwing them in. It really does make a difference. And while this may add just a little extra effort, a few minutes spent doing something like sautéing aromatics will pay out major flavour dividends later. Also, don't be afraid to season or occasionally taste your slow cooker meal when possible, as that will help you course correct when necessary. Slow cookers are often used in recipes for hearty roasts, and have no doubt that this classic use of a slow cooker is well earned, but that's not all these cooking tools can do for you. In fact, a slow cooker can be very useful to you even if you do not include any meat at all. It is true that slow cookers are good for fattier, tougher cuts of meat because the extended cooking times will help tough meats to become more tender. However, you'll also love it for leaner cuts of meat, along with everything from pork to chicken. Just be sure to adjust cooking times accordingly, as lean cuts may cook faster. Don't be afraid to be creative with different types of meat.
Today, we're talking ham hocks, so get ready to rock out with your hock out.
Yes, slow cookers are great for stews, chili, and soups. Everyone probably knows that already, but slow cookers are more than single-purpose pieces of kitchen equipment taking up valuable storage space. So put a stop to your worries, as there are all sorts of dishes you can make in your slow cooker. In fact, any meals that benefit from slow cooking will excel in this pot. Look at it this way, the slow cook pot is designed to help you prepare any dish that cooks well at a low temperature and takes extended cooking time. That means everything from the creamy mac and cheese to those savory enchiladas will be perfect in there. Let your imagination run free when it comes to considering just what could be made in a slow cooker. There are a lot of people who still believe that slow cooking pots trap all the moisture from the food, which then waters the whole meal down. While this is true on a certain level, it's not necessarily as bad as most people assume, nor is it even something that you always want to avoid. All you'll need to do is add a bit of cornstarch in the last half hour or so of cooking and finish your meal with the lid off. This will help you to achieve your preferred consistency and give the dish enough time to thicken up to the perfect sauce state. Conversely, that extra liquid can also keep a soup or sauce from over-thickening, resulting in a meal that everyone is going to love. Remember, meat and vegetables often give off a lot of liquid while cooking, and because of the lid, it won't evaporate away like it might in a pot or pan. If you happen to add too much liquid, it can be reduced by cooking on high without the lid for a while. Just remember to keep an eye on it towards the end to make sure the result is to your liking. One of the biggest myths about slow cooking is that you must brown your meat first. While browning the meat can help to add flavor to your final dish, it's also one you can skip if you're short on time. To brown or not to brown? When deciding whether to take the time to brown something before slow cooking, consider the other ingredients in the dish. Are they very flavorful, such as spicy enchiladas or a tomato sauce? Or is it something with a little less kick? If you're cooking something with a mild, subdued flavor, it's worth taking the time for this extra step. But if your dish already has a ton of spice and seasonings, you can safely save yourself some time and skip this. Slow cooking is a moist heat method of cooking, so meat does not brown easily, but you should also keep in mind that browning will dry the meat out more. Also, keep in mind that browning beforehand will shorten the cooking time, as can changing up some settings like the amount of time you should be cooking. Another myth that some people believe is that you should never open the lid when slow cooking. It makes sense since this is a mistake that can happen with your oven, perhaps while baking a cake or cookies. Slow cookers aren't quite so finicky, however, and while frequent, prolonged peaking can lead to heat loss, a quick look isn't going to hurt anything. If you're going to be opening the lid mid-cooking, just try your best to do it quickly and when it's necessary. It even might help in some cases to remove the lid completely near the end of cooking, especially if you're trying to make sure veggies aren't getting overdone. Leaving the lid off towards the end of a cook time will allow the dish to continue gently cooking and thicken slightly, especially if it's set on high. Once the dish is perfect, change the temperature to keep it warm and replace the lid until you're ready to serve for that ideal family dinner.
Elizabeth, honey, how was school today?
I don't know. Adding frozen meat to a slow cooker is actually perfectly fine, as long as you're careful to do something that you should be doing with meat regardless of the cooking method, keeping an eye on the temperature. The USDA recommends checking all meat and seafood internal temperatures with a thermometer before consumption to prevent foodborne illnesses, and that's the case whether that's on the grill or the stovetop or in the slow cooker. Keep in mind that leaner cuts of meat, such as pork or chicken, will cook faster than fattier, tougher meats like those roasts. That's because a chicken breast doesn't have a lot of connective tissue and fat, so if you are dealing with a bunch of diced up chicken and want to cook it all day, you may want to use fresh meat rather than frozen, simply to avoid overcooking your meal. However, with beef, using frozen meat is often a good way to go. It's also a great time saver if you already have meat waiting in the freezer and decide that you want to toss it in the slow cooker before you leave for work. For many cuts, there's no real reason to wait for it to defrost. There's no real reason not to use the majority of your slow cooker's volume when making a meal. In fact, Hamilton Beach says that for the best results, you'll want to fill your slow cooker at least halfway, and preferably, you'll want it 2/3 full. Some worry that if they overfill a slow cooker, this will increase cooking time and lead to less flavorful food. But it's actually not a problem. In fact, if you've only filled your slow cooker halfway, you might want to check for doneness 1 to 2 hours earlier than the recipe specifies, as the food is likely cooking faster than you might think. Of course, that's fine if you are on top of it and giving the slow cooker a little extra attention towards the end of the cook process. If cooking soups or stews, remember to leave a 2-inch space between the lid and food itself. That way the recipe has room to come to a simmer without making a mess on your counter. Ultimately, any portion size will be fine in the slow cooker if you adapt for it. The right amount of food in the slow cooker provides the perfect environment for heat to circulate and to braise or simmer at a steady temperature. So just take a minute and decide what's best for your particular meal. Some people are worried about the idea of putting a liner in their slow cooker. For many, it looks like nothing more than a plastic bag. Will it melt? Will it burn? Also, some people are nervous that plastic may contain chemicals that can seep into food and create a serious health problem or two. After all, we know we shouldn't be microwaving a lot of plastics. So is this quasi-mysterious slow cooker liner okay? The reality is that slow cooker liners have been available for quite some time, and nowadays many are free of harmful chemicals like BPA. Many slow cooker users find that liners help them save a lot of time in cleanup. People who use them often do so because they are easy, affordable, and make cleaning up a snap. Of course, you'll want to take a minute to read over any details concerning your liner in the slow cooker manual.
If you're hungry for something that has butt in its name, then you have the sense of humor of a 5-year-old, but the culinary taste of a respectable adult. So whip out your slow cooker and throw in your thighs, shanks, and yes, even your butts. If there's a running theme with meats that are ideal for the slow cooker, it's that they're best when cooked at a low temperature over a long period of time. That may be stating the obvious, but it doesn't mean it's any less true.
True.
So, to kick things off, we have pork butt. Occasionally known as a Boston butt, pork butts aren't actually butchered from a pig's backside, but instead, they come from its shoulder area. With the high level of fat and collagen within that muscle, pork butt tends to become incredibly tender and moist when cooked low and slow, making it absolutely perfect for the slow cooker. So since there's no other feasible option to prepare pork butt besides an extended cooking time, there's no reason not to use the slow cooker. It pretty much guarantees you'll end up with a delightfully shreddable final product. If we're being perfectly honest, we're not entirely sure the world really needs lamb shanks. But lack of necessity doesn't have to be lack of deliciousness. Shanks are attached to a sheep's shin bone, and they come with all the connective tissue expected from such a frequently utilized muscle area. And like other bone-filled tough cuts of meat, lamb shanks are absolutely perfect for a slow cooker. Cooking lamb shanks at a low temperature for a long period allows the meat to tenderize, resulting in an out-of-this-world final product. A slow cooker also retains plenty of moisture in the meat, so you don't need to rely on your own saliva too much. Although, we're pretty sure your mouth will be watering anyway. One quick tip as you begin: before you actually throw your shanks in the slow cooker, take the time to sear them before starting the cooking process. You might not realize that pot roast is a specific cut of beef, but as it turns out, pot roast is in fact just another word for chuck roast. No matter what you call it, it's one of the absolute best cuts of meat for your slow cooker, butchered from the cow's shoulder region. A boneless chuck roast is full of the flavor you're craving when your stomach has an unquenchable desire for red meat. With a high volume of connective tissue, this incredibly lean cut takes a long time to tenderize while cooking. Thus, it's the type of meat that needs to be slow cooked, no matter how you prepare it. One step worth considering is searing a chuck roast's edges before placing it in the slow cooker. After all, raw meat can always benefit from pre-searing before the slow cooking process begins, since it enhances the flavor of both the meat itself and the surrounding dish. The idea of cooking any type of ground meat in a slow cooker likely conjures images of various stews and sauces. This assumption makes perfect sense, and in fact, it's a fantastic idea.
Good idea, oh lord. Of course it's a good idea.
Perhaps you're partial to chili, and you're just dying to make a batch in your slow cooker. Well, you're in luck, since this particular kitchen device offers a nearly foolproof path to creating chili, particularly if you brown the meat beforehand. The only real question is which ingredients to include. After all, you can legitimately do nothing more than toss the ingredients into a pot, let them simmer for hours, while occasionally stirring, and voila! A large pot of effortlessly delicious chili awaits you as your final reward for your patience. But don't stop there. There are even more ways to use ground meat in a slow cooker besides chili. For example, meatballs. One tasty option involves cooking par-baked meatballs in a vat of scratch-made tomato sauce, since that sauce eventually penetrates the meat during the process. You may be wondering why chicken thighs are on this list instead of the larger, more plentiful chicken breasts. Simply put, there's no way around the fact that the higher fat level found in dark meat lowers the risks of overcooking and drying out your meat while in the slow cooker. Thus, in the battle of poultry in the slow cooker, we have to give the edge to the thighs. Furthermore, since chicken thighs are known to contain a high level of connective tissue, there's really no better option for this particular cut than slow cooking. And despite chicken thighs' slightly high-fat content, there's no reason you have to forego a healthy meal when preparing it in a slow cooker. If you do it right and take your time, you'll end up with a delectable, easy, and nutritious meal. When it comes to beef brisket, you'll most likely imagine it cooking in a smoker, or perhaps a barbecue pit, and that actually points to its strong suitability for the slow cooker. After all, a smoker is nothing more than a different type of slow cooker, meaning there's no reason to doubt brisket's compatibility with a kitchen-based slow cooker as well. A cut of meat from the lower chest area, brisket comes from a frequently used muscle of the cow and contains a rather unsettling amount of connective tissue as a result. As beef brisket is both tough and overrun with the cartilage-like matter, you don't need to be a chopped judge to recognize why a slow cooker offers one of the best and simplest ways to break down its tough interior. If you're still apprehensive about shifting away from the barbecue, there's no reason to fret. After all, with the right ingredients, you can rather easily infuse barbecue flavors into beef brisket in the slow cooker.
What you have in your hand is the exact step-by-step instructions on how to make my brisket.
If you've often found yourself baffled by the use of oxtails in the culinary world, then you're not alone. Yet we have to admit there's something to be said for utilizing every single edible part of an animal. For one thing, it reduces waste. And if we're being perfectly honest, oxtail actually is an incredibly flavorful, tender piece of beef. When it's prepared in a slow cooker, that is. Preparing oxtail with the bones and fat intact is crucial to developing this cut's proper depth of flavor. Of course, the inclusion of those fat and bones is precisely why the slow cooker is positively perfect for preparing oxtail, as it will melt the fat down without sacrificing any taste. Since oxtails are often utilized as a main component of stews in British households, you may just want to consider potential slow cooker stew recipes that feature oxtail. Just be sure to take the necessary steps to avoid producing an overly oily oxtail stew when you do. Pork loin may be mistaken for the similarly named pork tenderloin on occasion, but the differences between these two cuts are quite apparent with a simple eye test. The long, thin, tube-shaped tenderloin is easy to distinguish when placed beside a shorter, thicker loin cut. Additionally, while tenderloin is far too lean to endure anything beyond a quick sear or roast, the larger, fat-capped loin is perfectly suited for the slow cooker. Since pork loin tends to be much less tender than the aptly named tenderloin, cooking it in a slow cooker allows its tougher muscle fibers to break down and soften over time. In fact, you may find that it's quite similar to pulled pork made with pork butt, though it just barely misses matching pork butt's slow cooking prowess in that area. But we're not here to rank any cuts of meat, but just to provide general guidance on what types to use. So if you're in the mood for a super simple pork loin meal, then you're absolutely good to go with your slow cooker. Once again, we have a cut of meat that you might find a little puzzling on its own, with a name that might just also make you chuckle uncontrollably: beef cheeks.
Cheeky monkeys, all of you.
But the relatively ridiculous nature of beef cheeks is precisely what makes the slow cooker such a desirable option for preparing them. After all, beef cheeks are exactly what they sound like, the tissue from the cow's cheek muscle. Since these muscles are frequently utilized by cattle, beef cheeks are incredibly tough before cooking, which, therefore, makes them ideal for the slow cooker. You've probably realized at this point that tough, almost leathery cuts of meat are generally best served by the slow cooking process. Since beef cheeks fall into this category, it's no surprise that they need plenty of time to tenderize. Of course, not everybody can devote every single day in the kitchen to a process this lengthy, but when you can find the time, beef cheeks can absolutely be transformed into a rich, melt-in-your-mouth meal in a slow cooker. There are some who may prefer smoking beef cheeks, but there's no reason to lose faith in the slow cooker. As we've already mentioned, the name pork butt is a bit of a misnomer, since that cut actually comes from a pig's shoulder muscle. But that's not the case when it comes to the cut of beef known as rump roast. In this case, as you might expect, rump roast does indeed come from the cow's actual backside. Not only that, But since it comes from the muscle responsible for a cow's movement, rump roast is extremely lean, thereby making it ideally suited for the slow cooker. Since nothing tops a slow cooker when it comes to tough cuts of meat, it's no mystery why the rump roast deserves a spot in your slow cooker rotation. It's ideal for similar reasons as the chuck roast. Rump roast is beset with connective tissue, which remains nearly inedible if it's not cooked down properly, i.e., slowly and over low heat. Rump roast may not technically be categorized as a pot roast, since that moniker is reserved for chuck roast. But when you use a slow cooker to prepare rump roast, you'll never notice a difference. Have you ever cooked an entire chicken in a slow cooker? Perhaps the mere thought of that concept sounds absolutely ridiculous to you. But there's no reason to be chicken about attempting a feat as stupendously easy as preparing a whole chicken in the slow cooker. Ultimately, when it comes to the absolute best cuts of meat to slow cook, one of the best options isn't a cut at all. It's the whole thing. In addition to the incredible ease offered by slow cooking a whole unbutchered chicken, doing so also provides a chance to utilize every part of the bird in some beneficial manner. For one thing, the chicken's meat gets so tender and juicy in a slow cooker that it nearly melts off the bone. Thus, you can quite literally obtain every single scrap of meat found on the bird. Furthermore, the chicken's bones can be effortlessly removed after cooking. They in turn can be used to create a dynamite homemade chicken bone broth for future use. And everybody knows how delicious leftovers are when put to new, creative uses. We could probably use the phrase falling off the bone to describe any cut of meat that's been prepared in a slow cooker. Well, at least the ones with bones in them. Sometimes, though, it can be fun to defy expectations, but other times, it's actually best to do exactly what everyone is expecting you to do. And in the case of beef short ribs, we have to agree with anyone who describes it as falling off the bone tender. And as you've probably already figured out at this point, that makes it one of the absolute best cuts of meat for your slow cooker. When it comes to slow cooking beef short ribs, why bother trying to find some fancy pants way to describe a cut of meat that legitimately falls off the bone after cooking? The proof is in the pudding, or in this case, it's in the beef. If you prepare short ribs in the slow cooker, you'll discover firsthand what we're talking about.